There we go. Okay, well, welcome to our Ask a Scientist and Teacher webinar. And without too much more, this is part of the Northeast US Shelf Long-Term Ecological Research Schoolyard program, part of our education outreach. And today we have with us two members who just went on our winter transect cruise in early January. We have Greg and Alex with us, and it was a wintry, windy expedition. And these are pictures of them both on the deck during one of the greatest weather days. But I'm going to turn it over them to introduce themselves. Go ahead, Greg.
All right, my name's Greg Rowe. My background's in environmental consulting, so I used to work on offshore wind projects as well as land-based wind projects. But I decided to make a career change to teaching, so I actually went back at 45 to get my teaching certificate. So I've been teaching environmental science and biology over the past 3 years.
All right. And Alex.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Cabanelas. I go by Alex. A little bit about myself. I'm from San Juan, Puerto Rico. I did my bachelor's in Florida, marine biology and environmental science. And while I was there, I did a lot of research in the Everglades. Then I moved to Alaska to work. I worked on some spawning salmon projects in Southeast Alaska. Then I did my master's at Ohio State University, where I was working in Lake Erie mostly. And now I just started my PhD at WHOI-MIT.
All right, excellent. And we brought Greg and Alex together because they were on the same watch on this cruise. And that's a bonding experience in and of itself. But do you guys want to talk about what the weather was like out there?
Oh yeah, so winter weather, that was fun. It was very windy, like Annette mentioned. I think the first 2 or 3 days were actually pretty nice in terms of like ocean conditions. It was pretty calm. And then towards the end of our trip, like middle of our trip, it started getting rougher and rougher to the point that we had to kind of get back closer to shore and wait to be able to go back out and sample. So very windy, cold, and towards the middle and end of the trip, very shoppy. Greg can probably talk more about that.
Yeah, Alex definitely has a better stomach than I do. So unfortunately, I had 10 hours where I was pretty much down and out. So yeah, luckily Alex was able to cover my slacking for those 10 hours when I was doing a lot of sitting down, some heavy breathing, and looking at the horizon.
So Greg, was that, I'm looking at the true wind speed graph, was that, so you guys did all of the full transect in these first few days before the wind speed cranked up. So I'm guessing, Greg, that your seasickness came as the wind started to crank up and
Yeah, it was interesting because I think it was day 2, like halfway through day 2. It was just my roommate got it as well. He got a lot worse than me. He was out for like 3 days. But yeah, it was just something about that change just got to me. So
Yeah.
Knock on wood, we had Dramamine, and about after 10 hours, I was back to normal. So it wasn't that bad. Like I said, my roommate had it a lot worse than I did.
Yeah. And you guys muscled through.
And muscled through, yeah.
Yeah, it is something that, we're not expected, but a lot of people get seasick. So kind of used to we know how to deal with that.
Yeah. And for everybody, it's a little different and it's also different on every ship because the roll time, the pitch, and just what the waves and swell are doing. So, I think it's great that you guys were able to get all the way out. And these are the transect lines that show just from the ship surface sampling and the weather instruments on the deck. So this is the full transect line that goes out. You can see the air temperature actually got warmer as you got away from shore, but only up to 14 degrees Celsius. But that's kind of nice for January. And it's also interesting to me. It looks like, could you see any indication when you got out towards the end of the transect line that you were in warmer water, or any indication that that was close to the edge of the Gulf Stream at all?
It felt way warmer. Like the
Mhm.
air temperature felt warmer.
Yeah, I'd say it was definitely like, actually, I didn't use gloves the entire trip, shockingly, because I was like, I'm playing with water, and it was the last day, it was very cold or whatever, so I probably should have wore gloves the last day, but yeah, the whole time I didn't even wear gloves, shockingly. So it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, well, I could see that. I mean, you're doing a lot of fine work with your hands, so I could see that the gloves could feel cumbersome.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go to, you want to talk about a little bit what like the lab is like on the ship, either one of you.
Yeah, that's fine. So the main lab was very interesting in the sense that there was so much computer, as you can see by the by the images there, with all the screens. And especially for my students being in high school, I tell them they love their cell phones and everything else, right? Technology. So bringing that right into the classroom to show them, be like, yeah, listen, we have cameras throughout the place. We have multiple sensors that give us live readings, is a pretty interesting thing, because a lot of the kids that I had didn't realize so much went into it. So it was nice to have a few cameras on board to see what was going on, as well as to be able to take some photos to show them.
Yeah. Alex, how does this compare to like any other ship labs or whatnot that you've been on other
Oh,
cruises?
so I've
you've
mostly
been?
been on way smaller research vessels on day trips. So like the next larger one would be the one we had in Lake Erie, which was about 38-foot vessel. So
Mhm.
no space at all for work. It's just used for field work. So this is really nice to have a space where you can work, where you can see and like just get things done, collect the specimens, and then you can get to work right there. So that's really nice. And yeah, the spots, lots of computers and lots of monitors. You can see the boat speed and the vessel direction and how long it's going to take to our next spot, which I really like being able to see that, because then you can get prepared for your next sampling event. But yeah, way larger, like way more room than in smaller vessels.
Yeah. Great. Okay, tell us about how water is collected while you're out there.
Yeah, so this is, here we have two pictures of the CTD, which is conductivity temperature depth profiler, and this is a CTD rosette. So there's all these bottles around the rosette that we send out to water, and then they lower down to depths, and they all automatically collect water like close at certain depths, and then we can then get that water back and do any sorts of experiments or extractions that we would like to do with them. And the nice thing is that there's fiber cables on it, so we have we can see the data as it's collected. Then we can see when each bottle is closing. Let's see what else. Anything else I should add?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we go back to this slide, this monitor here that it's got a white box on it, but that would be where you would actually get that feedback from the fiber optic cable that shows you how the temperature or the fluorescence or the salinity or all the variables that are being measured with the CTD. That would be where you'd be able to see them and decide where to close the bottles and collect water. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I think for this cruise, I think it's already preset. Like they all always close out around the same depths, but
Oh yeah, I just saw that little highlight. Was that you, Stace? This screen that's showing an active profile, or at least from the last one. And yeah, because this is a long-term project and we're looking at some consistency within these stations, we want to be able to, consistently look at the same depths so that we can compare them from season to season at that station. And then there are enough bottles on the rosette that if there are other places of interest, I think those options are. But, one of the things, I don't know if you guys saw the water budget before the cruise, into how, we really have to think about, if we collect this total amount of water at each station, who needs how much water for their research? How many different samples would you take out of one bottle when the rosette came up?
Greg
About.
and I were not directly working on the CTDs.
You weren't water collectors.
But I
we
did
weren't
help a
part of
couple
that
of
one.
times. So I think it depended on which lab it was going to. Some like didn't even use an entire bottle.
Yeah.
Some used more than one, and some were split. Like maybe the same lab was doing 3 different experiments or 4. So then they were collecting different amounts of waters from different bottles. So it was interesting to see how everything was divided up between different labs and different groups and different experiments that were going on.
So how many people on your watch were responsible for collecting water? About.
Would you say 4 to 5?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably right. Yeah, 4 or 5 people.
And then your job was more specifically doing the bongo nets. Yes?
Yes. So Greg and I worked directly with the bongo nets, which are 2 big nets. They're a little hard to see on these pictures, but there's 2 big nets, which
Here's the
actually,
bongos.
yeah, they have 2 big openings. And in this case, the nets were actually different sizes. So we're collecting different size ranges of zooplankton. So these nets mainly collect zooplankton and sometimes catch fish larvae or smaller fish that don't escape the net. So we deploy it as shown on the bottom left photo. Takes about like 3 people to be able to deploy it, especially on windy conditions. You have to push it out and make sure it goes down without flopping around and hitting the vessel or hitting us. So we send it out. We determine how much line we want to let out, depending on how far down, how deep the site is and how far down we want to sample. And then we bring it back up. Then the cottons, which are the little plastic things at the end of each net, come out. So we host the net, make sure all the specimens that are stuck to the side of the mesh get rinsed down to the end, to the cottons, and then we take the cottons out, which have all the zooplankton and other specimens, and then we can go into the lab and then run and collect their samples and divide them up how we want them to. So then the cool thing too is that each opening of each net has a flow meter, which
Yeah, I think we have a
tells us.
picture. There we go.
Yeah, there it is. So it's the second picture from the left. That's a flow meter, and then that tells us how much water was went into the net. So how much we can determine density of zooplankton using the values we take from the flow meter.
All right. So Greg, I know you had a story about in particular with the weather, and I think it probably, whether it was this particular day or not, obviously your job was to hold on to the cod end. Do you want to retell
Yeah,
that?
so I mean, I don't know what the amount of pounds were, but it was definitely heavy to move around. So we ended up using a crane, and when the winds were gusting up, I don't even know what the max was while we were out there, but basically it was almost like a kite. The wind would grab it, open up the entire net, and the cod end would be going back and forth in the air. So obviously you didn't want to get clocked in the head. You can see everybody wearing hard hats there for that reason, among others. But there was one time where I got so lucky, the wind just caught it, and knock on wood, I had my hand up and it went straight into my hand. Otherwise it would have clocked me straight in
Oh
the
my
face.
gosh.
So it was pretty crazy towards the end when the storm really moved in. So yeah, it took 3 people, 2 people for the front, and then another person, you know, trying to catch the cod ends or put them back in. And then he also had, you know, the crane operator who was actually doing the crane component. Then he had someone as oversight and directing everything as well. So yeah, it was quite the operation. It looks pretty basic, but it actually requires a decent amount of detail and paying attention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a couple of steps. And also we also had a ring net, which Greg is holding on that top right
Mhm.
picture. You can't really see it on the bottom left, but that ring net is attached higher up on the line. It's kind of flying above us. And when it's windy, it's really hard to kind of control because it's a small net and then it's so high up, we can't really reach it until it gets further down, closer to the water. So that was a little challenging to control the cotton and the net.
And is
when
that
we
what
had-
that mesh size would be for phytoplankton? That would be the really fine, almost silky feeling.
Yes, that one is the smallest mesh size we were using. I can't remember exactly.
I think it was
the
20
size.
20
Yeah, I
microns.
believe it was
Microns.
20.
Yeah.
Well, since
Okay.
that was so high up, I guess that's the reason I was catching those things. I guess that's the reason.
Right. Yeah, it must be above the picture here. It's up clamped onto the
Yeah.
wire.
So work with somebody taller than you, and then you're
Yeah. And here you can see it down in the water,
Yeah.
as they're both, as everything's streaming out. Of course, now I think these pictures might be from your fall experience with the Rhode Island for Rhode Island teachers, right, Greg?
No, actually, these are all from our cruise.
Oh, right. So
Yeah,
sunny
that's-
days and nice
Yeah,
weather.
this might have been the first day. I'm assuming.
Yeah, the first
That's
couple of
when we
days
grabbed those photos.
were really
First day
nice.
was gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so you get these nets back in, you've hosed them down to flush everything down into the jar or the cod end at the bottom, and you bring everything into the lab, and then what happens?
Yeah, so this was important. The reason I put this in here is specifically for my kids and following lab procedures. So I remember Sarah gave us that image on the left there, and she's like, all right, this is what we're going to be doing. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. So as you can see, 2 different types bongos there with the 335 and the 150, and then we start breaking everything apart. And on the middle picture there, you have Alex starting to break everything down with the equipment there. So again, zooplankton is very sticky stuff, will stick to pretty much anything. So you can see Alex with the water bottle in there, unless that's
Can you
ethanol.
describe what that plexiglass, I know what it looks like, but can you describe it for our?
Yeah, so it's almost like a wheel held up that's divided into 2, but it's not divided the entire way. It's tough to explain because you want the water obviously to be separated into two. So it's divided, I'd say, almost potentially half in two, and then the other half is open. I know this is sort of like all over the place. So you pour it into the open end, and then you can sort of see, sort of in the center, it has that diagonal white line going through it, and that's probably the divider.
Mhm.
So that actually separates the volume. And so if you look at the center, where it says split in half, then you're splitting into a quarter. So you're constantly dividing, more or less, to get these volumes for each different sample. Basically, all those containers on the right are going to be filled by what we're dividing there. So all those containers are needed for the diagram, basically, on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so it
Yeah,
was
so
very
it's even,
helpful to have these
say that again?
jars that it was very helpful to have these jars labeled and kind of ready to go before we even sampled. So we would, before we got to the station, we would leave these ready. And then once we got back with the samples, we didn't have to worry about what jar and label goes where. And then we could easily follow this diagram to make sure we were putting the right contents in each sampling jar.
Yeah, and this, like, looking at this diagram really it reinforces to me how that it's, each lab, each research question, each lab, they're all figuring out, like, well, I'm going to need this much in order to, do the morphology identification. I'm going to need this much to be able to do DNA barcoding. I'm going to need this much to, to pick through and identify the tech. And yet, you have to think about how much you can collect, how much it can be divided, and who needs everything, how it needs to be preserved, because I'm guessing that these weren't all preserved the same way, were they?
No, so some were preserved in ethanol, some were preserved in formalin, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Some were frozen.
Right.
And I think that was the 3 ways.
Yeah,
Ethanol,
that's about right.
formalin, and frozen with,
Oh yeah, 5. Yep, we got the formalin. It's good. We can zoom right in on this. That diagram is actually, that's great. And then it's a matter of checking and double checking and making sure that things are labeled correctly. And then obviously the frozen ones needs to go to the freezer. Where do things get frozen on the ship?
oh, there's actually 2, maybe 3 freezers on that ship, on the RV Endeavor. So that's really nice. And I believe they all have different temperature ranges depending on what you need. So I think there's a -80. There might be just like a regular type freezer. And there might be another -80 if I'm not mistaken.
I don't remember, to be honest, how many they had.
So it's nice that you can keep those on the ship and not worry about, keeping them in ice or something.
Keeping them on ice, right?
But we still had ice. If you needed ice, there was an ice machine. So
Yeah. Which Greg would have needed had that caught and hit him in the face. But
Definitely.
all right, so yeah, let's can you tell us a little bit about then the Stingray or the sled, which is kind of one of the higher tech ways of looking to see what's out there.
Yeah, this was pretty cool. When I first saw it, I was like, what in the world does this thing do? So this is actually responsible for taking high-res imagery and video throughout the water column. So it almost looks like an airplane if you could envision. So it has the tail wing, and actually the boat can control what depth that is at throughout the water column. So what they call a toyo, I believe they call it.
Mhm.
So it's like a yo-yo going up and down. And so what we would do is actually tow that behind the boat. And I think the max when we were furthest out, it went down to 600 meters, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yes.
600 meters, and you can imagine it starting at the surface, going down to 600 meters, back up to the surface, back down. And so they could adjust that. And I think we actually towed it pretty close to the surface once the storm hit, and we were pretty close to shore. So I think we were at like 20 meters, something like that, and held it pretty constant and ran it at different rates. And so what it actually produced, if you see the black ends there, that's actually taking the video. And I have a little video clip. I don't know if that'll work for you there. And then
It will.
see how quickly it's taking that video. And those are all little critters and different, what they call it, snow. She said there was a decent amount of sea
Marine
snow. What's it called?
Marine snow.
Marine snow, that's what it is. That's right. Marine snow. And so, for example, that image on the right, there is one. Basically, we had one day where we didn't do much. We were going back and forth because the winds and waves were so crazy. So I spent a lot of time just going through the video, checking different things out. So I grabbed a few shots of some pretty cool little critters and was able to grab something that looks similar, like a real world photo compared to, you know, the black and white imagery that it was producing. So it was a pretty cool way of documenting what is in the water column. And that bottom right image is the automated process of them documenting each little, that one is specifically phytoplankton, I believe.
Yeah, that looks
I
like
remember
it's
correctly.
part of the cytobot
Yeah,
imagery, but it's a similar idea into being able to take what passes by in the video and breaking it down into individual photos that can then be identified.
yeah. And
Something
for that
else
to be
about the
automated
stingray.
was awesome too, just
Yeah.
to see how quickly that comes up compared to having, you know, an individual person going through and grabbing stuff like I was doing. But
Yes, it speeds up the process. Something
little.
else about the stingray that's cool is that it's not only doing this imagery, it's also collecting hydroacoustics data. So sending out noise signals and waiting to receive a signal back to be able to tell what which zooplankton are in the water column and where. You can see, usually you can see the dial vertical migration with that. And it's also collecting temperature data and salinity and all those other.
So within this, the belly of the sled, you can see some of these other instruments that are doing that
Right.
work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the depth, we controlled the depth of where the stingray was in the water column by kind of a remote operated winch. So we could control the winch and pay out or pull in cable from inside the ship, which was really neat. Like we had this kind of remote control looking thing where we can tell it to either pay out or pull back more line. And then we had the cameras too to make sure we're watching the winch and making sure things are looking all right and nothing's breaking or doing something crazy. Just making sure all the safety protocols are in so we don't lose the stingray or.
Right. Yeah, that's not an inexpensive instrument. I know that there's always the feeling it's at least tethered to the ship by a cable. I know there are other instruments that are used, gliders and autonomous vehicles that, when you actually have to let go of the ship and unhook it from the cable, that's even more agonizing when you're using some of this more technologically advanced instrumentation. But yeah, I think one of the things that I think is amazing and not always conceptualized is with something like the Stingray or even the nets that you're towing along behind, that the depth of the tow is controlled is based on the angle of the cable and the speed of the ship. And the idea that if you're going faster, then, the object behind you is going to stream out farther behind. And if you don't want it to come up to the surface, you need to let it pay out more cable. And so it's a whole game, and it's really just geometry and angles. I always think back to if you want that thing to be twice as deep as what you have, cable length, there's your 45, 45, 90 triangle from geometry that you've got to use to figure out how deep it's going to be depending on the cable length.
Yes. And the nice thing with the Stingray, though, is that you can see real-time depth of where the Stingray is at. So then we kind of cross-check with the vessels reported maximum depth. So then we can keep it off the bottom, so it
Off the
doesn't hit
bottom. Right.
Don't want it hitting the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, it has those nice stainless bumpers there, but that's not really supposed to ever make contact with anything that would just deflect larger objects away from it should it encounter them. So you guys want to describe about how, we see the picture on the deck of the sled. That's like the size of a person. It's
the size of probably two of me. It's big.
Yeah.
I think it was like 6 feet across, right? 6, 8, something like that.
Yeah, I've seen it on deck a
trying to
couple
remember.
times, but as I say, it's, you can't quite spread your arms all the way out to, reach around the whole thing. It's
Well, you can
decent
see
size.
the size of that green ratchet strap. It's one of those really big ones, and it has a bunch of other straps and lines.
Oh, the strap that's holding it
Yeah.
down. Right.
So it's secure in many ways because it's very big and heavy. So
Yeah, not something you want sliding around on deck.
yeah, so putting that in the water is also interesting. I had the opportunity to operate the A-frame, which was pretty cool. But it also takes quite a few people to get the Stingray out and then get it back in. We have to communicate back and forth with the captain, make sure we're not slowing down too much or speeding up or just making any sudden movements that might cause the Stingray to just move and possibly hit the boat or something like that.
Greg, did you operate the A-frame or the winch or any of that while you guys were out?
No, I didn't get the A-frame. I was pretty much on rope duty. I did a lot of rope work with
Like the
CTD
tag
and
lines
stuff.
that help control it
Yeah.
while it's swinging in the air. You keep tension on it from opposite sides. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I actually have video of that when the storm was pretty bad and we were out. Wherever I need to get that to you guys, because it was it was out of the water, then it was completely in the water, the CTD, which is I'd probably say 6 feet tall at least. So yeah, it was
Our carousel.
yeah, I'd say probably
about 6
a
feet.
little over. Yeah, about 6 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, so the ropes are used as well with putting anything that's up swinging in the air. It's never fully free and swinging. There's always some control. Yeah. All right. Let's go on to Greg. You added this.
Yeah, this was
slide and
actually
being able to. Yeah, go ahead.
This was actually from the fall when we were out. I'm trying to remember where this was taken. This might have been out by the wind farm, actually off Block Island, when we did this. But again, trying to bring this information back to my students in high school. So having them, looking at data, understanding patterns, reasons why things might be similar versus different. And, you know, this is obviously real world stuff. So that's one of my career technical education pathways in Burville was the environmental science program. So with that, you have to have 80 hours of hands-on experience, as well as be involved with industry on various projects. So obviously connecting with URI, Woods Hole on this was definitely a great way for me to bring stuff that they're doing on a, you know, daily basis into the classroom. So looking at temperature, salinity, depth, and oxygen and how they all relate, especially in environmental science, was a great way to connect. And the other thing too, you think of environmental science and marine biology, everybody talks about dealing with, you know, swimming with the dolphins and stuff like that, but environmental science covers so many different things, right? And so being able to actually bring a little chemistry into the classroom is always a good thing too, so.
Yeah, well, and I have to say, I mean, I can completely go geeky on CTD plots like this, where you have the temperature and the salinity, you know, going down in depth, and just how this, you know, to be able to make sense of a graph like this, you really, you're bringing in the density of warmer water, and, you know, there are ways to reason through it. And in a high school or even middle school science class, to think about it, even though it starts out looking like the most foreign and strange graph, how can I possibly make sense of that? But it really does pull together some of the basic physical science things in the real environment. So I can look at CTD plots for a long time and get really excited about them. And we actually, I had, there might still be some data sets like this within the data jam. I don't know if any of your students chose any of those. Your students, Greg, have already submitted their projects for this year's data jam. Did any of them look at some of the data sets on CTDs, or did they stick with mini boat data sets? I haven't looked at
Actually, I was
that.
sort of disappointed. None of them chose the mini boat. But that's fine. I was like, all right, there's other things that they're interested in, which was good. So the DNA or the phytoplankton fingerprinting they did, they were looking at the various fish species. What was it called? The Lucky 7 data set.
Yeah.
Looking at different costs, supply and demand versus you know, what's being caught out there. And then what was my last one? The last one, oh, was the babies in bathwater.
Oh yes,
Looking
the ocean
at-
acidification.
Yeah, ocean acidification. So it was good. The mini boat, I'm going to try to promote maybe next year a little bit more, see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think some of these just in you know, the data jam opportunities, we're trying to get a chance to, you know, for students to look. Oh, it's going down where the phytoplankton bloom, that has some of the CTD or the fluorescence profiles. Nor'easters of 2018 has some of those wind and wave plots from a transect cruise that Stace was on. Stace Bolya, who's here with us, she was on that particular February cruise, and so it's got some of the ship's data from that. But yeah, getting the kids to look at data, and I'm excited to look at your students' projects come March, when we actually start getting all the students' projects in. But you know, our connection with you, Greg, did happen through these mini boats, and we I knew about these drifter options for classrooms, and then on our summer transect cruise back in July, Educational Passages contacted us and said, hey, is there a chance that you can deploy this mini boat for a class and a teacher? And this was your boat. So you want to talk about a little bit about the mini boat? We have, I don't know, we've got
Yeah.
about 10 minutes here before we'll
Yeah,
wrap.
real quickly, basically Educational Passages, and I think Cassie was supposed to be on here, who runs it, puts together these kits, sailboats, which you can see there on the right, the final product. But basically the kids are responsible for putting together and doing various things. You can see the top left picture there, they're putting the GPS unit on, as well as the ocean sensor. So that boat, we put in a water temperature as well as an air temperature recorder. They design the sails, they paint it. The bottom right of the 4, you see the solar panels for the GPS and all the data recording. Yeah, it's a great project. Again, with the CTE programs, I had to have 80 hours where they weren't necessarily in a classroom. They were actually using their hands and building and constructing. So this was a great project for me. And you could see, because it had GPS, you could actually tell by the center photo there what was happening to the boat once it was launched. So that was a couple years ago. You can see the black line is the track of the boat, and the little sailboat is where it currently was. That is wind that you see there in the red and the yellow and the blues, the strength of wind. And that boat actually went right through Tropical Storm Elsa.
Oh, wow.
So hard to believe that little boat survived Tropical Storm Elsa and made its way just outside of the Bay of Fundy. So yeah, it's hard to believe that that little boat got up to, I think, 6-something knots, 6 to 7 knots. So yeah, very, very durable. I have one boat, although we lost GPS recording, is somewhere in between Ireland and Iceland, somewhere in there in Greenland.
Cool.
So hopefully the recording comes back. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But that one's been out for 2 years now, I think.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Coming up on 2 years. So yeah, they're good boats, good. And the nice thing about this too, from an education standpoint, this goes year round. So even during summer, you know, the kids can check in. I usually had an Instagram page where I'd put updates to keep everyone connected. And yeah, it was great, not only for the students, but actually the parents got very interested in it as well. So a great project.
Yeah, I know there are some, you know, in some of the other mini boats, when you go to the Educational Passages site, you can see all the mini boats that are currently out there. And I know some of them that have made it all the way across the Atlantic. You know, now schools are connected in Ireland to the launch schools in the US, or like there's some neat connections just through the mini boats. And this is the first year we've added this because we deployed your boat on the transect cruise. We thought it would be a fun thing and a way for students to look at some of the just the surface data from what your boat did. And one of the data sets on the data jam actually gives them a chance to compare it to a few days where it overlapped with where the endurance was. And, you know, so it's a big boat versus little boat data set.
Yeah, so last thing, real tidbit here. So that boat was released somewhere off the continental shelf there, just left to the black line. It made it back, what, an hour from where I live in a week. And that's 100 miles out. So that's me. And I forget if it was May or June, the water was like 50 degrees and it was stuck on this barrier island or wherever. So my buddy and I went out and we grabbed it off the rocks.
Oh my gosh.
That was an interesting day.
Too much attachment to your boat there,
I
Greg.
know, right? Well, it did have my name. I think the kids that was Row Rider. My
Oh, that's the
other
one that we
one,
launched too, yeah.
yes,
So,
the other one was Rowboat. So that's the one over by Ireland somewhere.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, this is great. And I think, just having you guys talk about your experience, and I think it's really neat. I think the two of you, Alex and Greg, are going to be able to continue conversations about, the work as Alex, as you develop your research questions and get more data. I'm certainly hoping that we'll be able to continue to share what you're doing with whether it's Data Jam participants or another, Ask a Scientist opportunity further down your career path at Woods Hole. And it was great that I love, Greg, even if you're just, this is your first year doing Data Jam with your students, that we were able to wrangle you and get you out
Yeah.
so easily out on the January transect cruise. You're the first teacher that's willingly gone on the January cruise. And of course, it was great to have your school principal just like support things like this. I think it's fabulous to be able to get out there and then be able to come back and tell the students stories and give them ways to relate. So it's, that's part of our research experience for teachers that we can offer through our LTER schoolyard program. We've talked a little bit about the Data Jam, which is a way to get connected, and there are other resources that we offer that can keep you connected to our work and things that are going on. One of them is just, we try to post on Twitter, whether it's things that are going on for the schoolyard or just real connections to our research publications, as well as events that are happening. And you mentioned the images from the sled, and one of them that you showed was from the Cytobot. So that's something that's always accessible to follow along and see what's happening. And yeah, this has been really good. Oh, thanks, Stace, for filling in the full Cytobot name. But thanks so much, Greg and Alex. This has been a lot of fun. For anyone watching the presentation later on from the recording, there are links to connect to our information, and Stace has put in the chat how you can find out more about our middle and high school opportunities on the website. So with that, I'll stop sharing the screen and
Good.